Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
For this second week of Advent, we're reading Ezekiel 37, 1-14, Ezekiel's famous vision of a valley of dry bones. We wonder why God asks Ezekiel whether he thinks the bones can live, and why on earth God instructs Ezekiel to prophesy directly to the bones. Kind of a ridiculous prophetic task. But as the bones come together with new sinews and new flesh, we recognize the importance of a prophet who can speak hope to the hopeless and restoration to a community in despair. We also notice that the breath that animates the restored bones comes not directly from God, but from the four winds, reminding us that we need to be open to the inspiriting breath of the world around us, from which our renewal may come. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, it's Bible Worm time.
It sure is. It is very rainy and cozy here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And you can see me through the magic of Zoom, but if you couldn't, I would tell you that I was wrapped up in a cocoon and it was totally dark and cozy and I was just talking off the top of my head. But you can see that's not true.
It's funny to me how the cozy rainy days of the fall feel so nice in the fall, and then those same days in February, you're oh my God.
You're
please
so
go away.
Depressing.
Yeah. I guess that's just that's I guess the beauty of the cycles of nature is by the time it's time for the next thing, you kind of are sick of the old things, so you just keep going.
Yeah. True story. But here we are.
Here we are. We're reading Ezekiel today, Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 1-14. This is a pretty famous passage about a valley full of dried bones. And so this has lived in kind of the Jewish and Christian imaginations for many a year. And so kind of excited to read this with you. I don't know that we've read this text together maybe since we read it 4 years ago for the narrative lectionary.
I think it's been a long time. Yeah.
So I don't really know. I don't have my inner Amy does not have a lot of things to say yet. So I'm excited about real life Amy, interpreting some things. Amy, in my tradition, just to remind us, we are in the second Sunday. This text is the text for the second Sunday of Advent.
Mm-hmm.
Ezekiel 37 is not one of the sort of usual suspects in terms of Advent texts. But I think it's kind of an interesting one. So it's not your job to pay attention to that, although if you've got things to throw in there, please do. But I'm going to try to connect it a little bit, at least toward the end.
I think that's a really interesting charge. I think it's look, I say this as a person who is not in a church community, and so I don't, I don't have Advent as a frame of reference. But I think it's a really interesting and important sort of challenge to take the lens of Advent and see all these different texts through that lens.
Yes.
And I can see how if that's, this is not this is not the text I'm used to, that maybe people would, I don't know. It's going to be great. That's what I'm saying. This is going to be great. This is going to be the perfect text for today.
I actually find it really refreshing. It gives you new eyes to see Advent. And Advent also gives you new eyes to see Ezekiel. And so
I think there's
creating, you and I, this is what we like to do. We like to create conversations between things and see what emerges. And so this is another chance to do that. Amy, last time we talked, we were in Daniel chapter 3, and we had our friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who were miraculously saved from the furnace.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are in Ezekiel 37. And so can you situate us historically and a little bit about what we can know about Ezekiel?
Yeah. Ezekiel is the trippiest prophetic book
that
of
is the
all
truth.
the prophetic books.
Yes.
So Ezekiel, he was exiled in the first exile. We talked, I think, back when we were reading Jeremiah, there were sort of two stages of exile from the Babylonian powers, Babylonian kingdom. One in 597, some people stayed in Jerusalem, some people were exiled, and then 10 years later, 587 BCE, that's when the temple was destroyed.
Right.
Ezekiel was sent out in that first exile and lived through the big exile in 587, lived through the destruction of the temple, and a little bit into the period of the exile that followed, which is to say the most intense time,
yes.
I think, that someone could be offering prophecy. And on top of that, Ezekiel was both a prophet and a priest.
Yes.
And so he had a particular sensitivity to the temple and the destruction of the temple and the desecration of that sense of like holy protected space that was happening around that time. His language is just incredibly striking and emotional and powerful and painful. I mean, if reading the book of Ezekiel doesn't make you feel some kind of way, then I don't know. And sometimes that way is discussed. Like sometimes that way, like it's there's like no holds barred here. Like it's a very powerful text. It moves into an area that some scholars have called apocalyptic, like because his visions are so wild and so unexpected, and his encounters with God and his visions seem so close. It really seems like a sort of pulling back of the veil. Anything that you would expect, this is the way the world works, not necessarily in Ezekiel. It might, maybe not. And so as such has been an interesting text for mystical thinkers who are sort of always interested in getting closer to that veil.
One of the things I love about Ezekiel, 2 times ago we were reading Jeremiah, and Ezekiel and Jeremiah were living and prophesying in very similar periods. Yes. Jeremiah, of course, was back in the land prophesying about the exile. Ezekiel, as you're saying, was one of the exiles. And so he is writing to the exiles as an exile. And it's just interesting to me to get both of those perspectives on this most traumatic of events in the biblical telling.
Yeah.
Where we are picking up today is in Ezekiel 37, which is well into the prophecies of Ezekiel, where he starts to think about the possibility of hope and restoration, even while he's in the midst of the exile. And so this text, I think, ultimately is a text about hope for the future, but it is delivered in a time that is deeply distressing and where people feel like, as we will see, everything has come to an end. All right, Amy, well, we're in Ezekiel 37, 1-14. I am reading in the Common English Bible, and I'm just going to read the first couple of verses and let us kind of set the stage for what is happening in this vision.
All right.
The Lord's power overcame me, and while I was in the Lord's Spirit, he led me out and set me in the middle of a certain valley. It was full of bones. He led me through them all around, and I saw that there were a great many of them on the valley floor, and they were very dry. He asked me, "Human one, can these bones live again?" I said, "Lord God, only you know." Okay, let's just start by talking about Ezekiel's sort of state here. He says, the Lord's power overcame me. He is in the Spirit of the Lord. He's led out to the valley. Can you just help me think about how, what is he saying about his, his state?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that Ezekiel is a prophet who has these visions, and it is often described as sort of, he's almost like taken places.
Yes.
And shown things, and he doesn't necessarily want to be taken to those places or to see those things. And so what I picture here, almost like he's like swooped up by the wind and like taken to some other physical location, like whether he was physically taken somewhere or that's just his experience of what's happening. that's what I'm imagining. I don't imagine sort of like I'm in the spirit, like I'm having an ecstatic experience. Although I don't know, maybe.
Oh, that's interesting because that's exactly how I read it.
You
Is
read
that
it
he's
as
an ecstatic prophet.
experience.
Yeah, and he's had this he's having this sort of visionary experience that's like I mean, I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I've sort of always read him as like being in a trance-like state or something.
Yeah.
But I like the way you're talking about it, where he's being transported and you're not sure whether he's literally being transported or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I kind of think that's what he's experiencing also is, for him, it seems very real.
This is what's real for him.
Yes.
Yes.
And
no, I
early
think
in the
that's
book,
right.
he's transported back to Jerusalem and he looks at the temple in chapters 8 to 10. He describes it in a similar kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the way he talks about it in that text is he got picked up by his hair and like taken back to Jerusalem. Yeah. And so whether or not, you know, that actually happened as such, it is like what he's experiencing, that this is very real to him.
Yes. No, I keep thinking back even earlier than, I think it's in chapter 3, but it's another one of these visions, and he describes like being picked up by angels, I guess.
Yeah.
And he describes the beating of their wings as loud that like when he gets dropped off, he just has to sit in silence for a couple of days. Like it has a real sensory component to it. Whatever is happening with his physical body, who knows? But he is experiencing this as an embodied thing.
That's really well said. So if you were like his friend and you like stopped by his house to see how he was doing, like it's not entirely clear what you would see and whether, you know, but from his perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he gets taken in his vision, in his experience, to a valley full of bones. And he gets like a little tour of the valley. And so I'm trying to just gather a mental image for myself of what it looks like. When you picture this in your own mind, what do you see?
I feel like this is, I'm moving too quickly to metaphor, but I will tell you this, maybe not metaphor, but the first way I thought of it was like the word used for valley here is like a cleft. Like there's been sort of like a cutting away of the land. And so, okay, I can see how that's a valley. And having it full of bones, it sounds like a communal grave to me.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like he's walking through a gigantic communal grave. But I don't picture the bones being together as skeletons.
Right.
I picture them just sort of, it's just a mess of bones.
When you say it that way, where my head goes, I don't know what this says about me, is to the scene in The Lion King where Simba and what's-her-face, when they're little, and they go out past the savannah where they're supposed to be, the Pride Lands, and they end up in the elephant graveyard. Do you know the scene I'm talking about?
You know, it's been a minute for me, but continue.
Yeah, the hyenas are there. There's like all these elephant bones, and I like that way of thinking about it. Is that this? So the way you're reading it is not that the people who died have necessarily died in exactly this spot, but that this is like a depository where, is that what you're saying? Like it's a bone repository?
Yeah, I guess so. I hadn't actually thought about that specifically, that specific question, but I guess that is how that would come to happen unless it was a very dangerous valley.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And eventually you'd think people would start being like, there's a lot of bones in there. Like maybe I'll go, like maybe I'll go back the other way.
Yeah.
There's a detail in verse 9 that, I mean, you don't know when you're reading this, but in verse 9, these are referred to as hargim, the slain ones, or the ones who have been killed, which suggests, I think, you can check me on this, that the way I'm reading that is that they have actually been killed in some sort of violent manner. And so these are people who were killed in war or killed in exile or killed in slavery. And then their bones maybe have been collected and deposited in this valley.
Yeah,
does that seem like
sense.
A reasonable reading to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. And that fits with my initial image of the sort of common grave.
Yeah. And I think your point is important, that they don't seem to be intact skeletons at this point. We're going to see their bones kind of reassembling later on, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
And so we've got this kind of like, it's just a pile of bones. we get the detail that they were very dry.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you do with that detail?
I think I learned from you the last time we read this that one fruitful way to read that is just that they have been bones for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. Although the idea that if they were moist, then maybe, I don't know.
Moist bones makes me
moist and bones. Okay, let's not talk about moist bones. These bones are dry. Yeah, I think the image of like all these bones together in a valley, not in skeletons, very dry. Like it just, if you had to come up with an image of like there is no life possible here, there is no life here. You're not close to life here. It's you are sort of standing in a grave.
Yes, I think that's right. I read these as just sort of bleached. If you've ever been like out in the desert and you see some kind of animal skeleton that's been lying out in the sun for a long time, and
I was thinking about like CSI bleaching of bones. I'm glad you were thinking of the sun.
I don't know about that. Yeah, but just like completely brittle and white and like nothing, nowhere close to life. I think that's the salient point.
Yeah, I think that's right.
God says to Ezekiel, mortal one, human one, can these bones live again? I'm interested in the asking of the question.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think, what do you do with the fact that God wants Ezekiel to make some kind of claim about this?
I think Ezekiel is so smart not to do it.
Yeah.
It just seems like such a trick question. I mean, so if you took any other person, let's put Ezekiel aside for a minute. Any other person who had a sort of more normal life experience. Being in this valley, like based on everything you have seen in your life, the answer is pretty clearly no.
Right.
I don't think that they can.
Yeah.
Now, Ezekiel's seen some pretty weird stuff. He hasn't seen stuff like this, but maybe he has seen enough to know. What is that stage where you're sort of learning, like you're aware of your own incompetence? He knows he doesn't know.
Yes.
Because he has had a lot of experiences already that he never would have imagined possible. And even, I would say, he's living at a time in history where things are happening that their whole belief system would have said, this can't happen.
Yeah.
Like, this is God's people and it's God's temple, and it can't happen that the temple is destroyed and the people are sent out of the land. Like, it's impossible. That impossible thing is happening. He's had all these totally insane visions that make no sense with his life walking on the earth on his two legs. So I don't know. It's very interesting that he is not at a point where he's like, no, it can't happen because everything is terrible. Like everything has been terrible and I now believe in terrible things.
Yeah.
But instead just says like, well, I clearly don't know. Like, I don't know.
I really like that a lot, Amy. I've been just thinking about like, why does God ask the question? For whatever reason, it's reminding me of Moses and the burning bush, which when we talk about that, and you've drawn my attention to this over the years, that in that story, God sets the bush on fire, and then Moses notices that the bush not only is on fire, but that it's not burning up, and that makes him curious. Yeah. And we have talked about that as like God is looking for a person with a certain kind of orientation.
Yeah.
And I have sort of wondered if the asking of the question is a little bit of a test of Ezekiel that way. Like, God needs to know what Ezekiel is going to say in order for God to do what's going to happen next. And he needs an Ezekiel who's not closed off to the possibility that, in fact, the bones could live. Where you and I would look at that valley, or I think you would. I know I would, that valley of dismembered bones that's been bleached in the sun. And I would say, no, like this is too far gone.
Right.
And God is wanting to see, is Ezekiel like Williamson, or is Ezekiel something else?
Right.
The CEB's translation of what Ezekiel says is, Lord God, only you know. The only is not actually there in the Hebrew. What he says is, Lord God, you know. And a lot depends on tone, I think, about what Ezekiel means there. Like, you could read it as, you know, like a statement of confidence in God, or you could read it as like, you know, it's like
dot, dot, dot.
I'm not going to say no, but like, come on, man. And so like, I just don't know quite how to read Ezekiel's tone. And so do you read him as confident that something's about to happen, or do you read him as leaving like a tiniest little bit of space that God could surprise him? Or what do you take from Ezekiel's answer?
It's interesting. The NJPS does the same thing. It says only you know.
Yeah.
Even though the Hebrew does not have the only. So I feel like they're trying to lead us in a certain way with the tone. I don't read Ezekiel as confident. I mean, I read Ezekiel's not the happiest dude. Like, for good reason.
Yeah.
But I think I read him almost as this, like, he is open to the possibility of just about anything. Like, he has given up trying to guess what is going to come next, which is a really difficult thing to do as a human in general.
Yes.
But it is interesting that God asks the question and he doesn't even try to answer it.
Yeah.
Like Ezekiel could have said, they will if you want them to.
Yeah. Yes. Nothing is impossible for you, O
Nothing's
Lord.
impossible for you. It's up to you whether they do. Which just, again, makes the question, as you're saying, the question itself is interesting. Why is God asking? And maybe the answer is precisely to see whether he says basically, I don't know, but you know, or wants to make some more confident statement. I don't see confidence in it. I see, just a profound not knowing.
One of the things that, like, once you have read this passage once, you know what the metaphor is going to end up having been at the end.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to not read that metaphor back to where we are right now. But Ezekiel, in his visionary experience, doesn't know. He's just looking at a valley of bones. He doesn't know that he's looking at a metaphor.
Right.
And so I think when you look at that valley of bones and you're not thinking metaphorically, the answer that's most obvious is, what the heck are you talking about? Obviously, no.
Right.
And what Ezekiel manages is not to say that. He's just, in my reading, he's just like one step above that. He's not ready to say, like, you can make it happen, Lord, or nothing is impossible for you, O Lord. But he doesn't shut the door all the way.
Yeah.
Like, you know. And maybe he doesn't, maybe he actually in his heart of hearts thinks the answer is no. But he doesn't say it.
Yeah.
So I read him as leaving the barest sliver of possibility. And that's enough. If he had shut the door and said, nope, then like God's got nothing to work with. Right.
Yeah.
So I like to read him that way, as just like holding on to the barest sliver makes possible things that God is going to do.
Hi, my name is John Weicker, and I am the Associate Pastor for Youth and Their Families at First Presbyterian Church of Durham, North Carolina. I am a Bible Worm supporter at the Bible Worm supporter level, $48 per year. And I do that not because we're on the narrative lectionary or even because I preach that often, although when I do preach and the texts line up, I certainly use the podcast. I actually use Bible Worm as my own personal devotion for the week. I'm someone who misses the deep theology and close reading of texts that I got to do a lot of in seminary. And in Bobby and Amy's work, I found that again. And so I listen on Monday mornings on my way over to church, and then Monday afternoons on the way back, as a way to prepare for the week, to do ministry, and to love Jesus and serve. I hope you'll join me in becoming a Bible Worm supporter too. And now back to this week's episode.
Okay, Amy, so let's pick up in verse 4. He said to me, prophesy over these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the Lord's word. The Lord God proclaims to these bones, I am about to put breath in you, and you will live again. I will put sinews on you, place flesh on you, and cover you with skin. When I put breath in you and you come to life, you will know that I am the Lord. I prophesied just as I was commanded. There was a great noise, and I was prophesying. Then a great quaking, and the bones came together, bone by bone. When I looked, suddenly there were sinews on them. The flesh appeared, and then they were covered with skin, but there was still no breath in them. He said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, human one. Say to the breath, the Lord God proclaims, come from the four winds, breath. Breathe into these dead bodies and let them live. I prophesied just as he commanded me. When the breath entered them, they came to life and stood on their feet, an extraordinarily large company.
It's creepy.
It's a little creepy.
Little
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Amy, the first thing that catches my attention here is that Ezekiel is instructed to prophesy to the bones, not about the bones. And I don't know that that matters, but there's a big pile of dried out bones. And Ezekiel's like, hey, bones, I'm prophesying to you. It seems weird to me. Do you do anything with that?
Do I do anything with that? I mean,
that was a terrible. I went to PhD school a long time to ask that
can you
question.
imagine being Ezekiel? Like, seriously, can you imagine being Ezekiel who has the door open just the tiniest bit, as you were saying, to like, I don't know everything and I don't know,
Yeah.
I recognize that I do not know what's possible here. And then God's like, talk to the bones.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like fraternity hazing. Like go talk to the bones and see if you can get them to do something. Like it's really, it's and he does it. He does exactly what he's told to do. But it really is making me think that like I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it's sort of like his faith is just like a millimeter ahead of what he's being asked to do.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I will.
I love what you're saying there, Amy. Like, it's a totally ridiculous thing to be asked. And Ezekiel must have felt a little ridiculous doing it. And, I like that. He's staying a millimeter ahead. Like, he doesn't flinch. Because God could have said, let me show you what I can do. And God could have made all this stuff happen anyway. But God doesn't do that. God's like, okay, Ezekiel, not just prophesy. It's not just like make a statement that you believe I can do this. And it's not, prophesy to the reader that this can be done, but it's speak to this valley full of dry bones. And that speech, which feels completely ridiculous to you, is necessary. Like that's what's going to make things happen. I just think that's so interesting. And I think what you're after, that Ezekiel, like this is kind of a ridiculous thing to do and to be asked to do. I mean, he doesn't comment on it being ridiculous, but it sure seems that way to me.
Yeah.
And so there's something in this sort of prophetic charge that feels like you're doing something completely ridiculous. Like these bones are dry bones, and I'm now talking to them. Hey, little bones, it's gonna be okay, guys.
And I think that I don't know if this makes it sort of easier or harder in my mind, but there's no one else here, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like often we read these sort of like sign acts or something like that, where the prophet is instructed to do something kind of crazy.
Yes.
So that people will see it and it's like come to understand something.
Yeah.
But there's nobody else there. So then like is the sign for Ezekiel?
Yeah. It seems to be, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Or maybe so for you and me, the reader. But
yeah. And it's so interesting then that Ezekiel himself has to say the thing. Like, because God could have just made the bones get up and do their thing. And Ezekiel it seems like he would have gotten something from that message. So like, what's the difference?
Yes.
If Ezekiel has said it.
What Ezekiel would have gotten had God done it is, God just done it, is God can do this.
Yes.
What Ezekiel gets when he does it is something like my prophetic word is necessary, plays a necessary role in the vivification of these bones. even though to me it feels completely ridiculous. I must yet still speak the
Yes.
words.
Yes. It's
Something
the
like
most,
that, maybe?
Yeah, it's the most lost cause.
Yes.
I don't see how my speaking these words, like clearly it would be God. Why do I need to be involved in this?
Yeah.
But you do.
And the difference between I believe God can do this and I am going to speak on behalf, like that's actually a pretty big step in my
That
mind.
is a big step.
A statement of belief versus an
Yes.
actual action that puts my skin in the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the prophecy that Ezekiel makes on behalf of God to the bones is, I'm going to put breath in you and you will live again.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the overall kind of prophecy, is these bones that appear to be dead and dried. I mean, they are dead and dried, can yet still have life. And then we get more details about that. I will put sinews, I will put flesh, I will put skin, I will put breath. I don't know, like you could have gotten to the same point without saying all of that. You could have just said, I will put breath in you and you will come to life. So I'm curious, do you make any sense of the detail of sinews, flesh, skin, breath?
I did not check this reference, but it made me think about the part in Jeremiah where it's like being known unformed in the womb, kind of.
Oh, yeah.
Like it seemed like sort of womb-like imagery.
I
to
like
me.
that. Yeah.
And so that does have, I don't know what made me, I think it's particularly the word sinews. Sinews?
Yeah.
How do you say that in English? I don't know. But just to have this real sense of like the miracle, like the miraculous nature of having bodies that have, that are stitched together in a particular way and that particularity is being held on to. It's not just like you will come alive and you'll be a different thing. You'll be dancing skeletons or whatever. Yeah, it feels much, much closer to a rebirth if they're going to be re-infleshed. I
love that, Amy, that connection to Jeremiah, the complexity of the human being and the intimacy of like connecting bones with sinews, like the knitting together in your mother's womb, that kind of idea. And so it's not just like suddenly there's a finished product, but it's like it's recognizing these really are complex endeavors. And there's going to be a point in the process where what you see is some bones stitched together with sinews, and that's not going to look particularly like anything happened. So I kind of like that sort of, it's complex and intimate, and God can do all of these things in a very careful, close way. And also it's not going to look like much, y'all, until the end. And then it's going to look like something. And so you've got to be patient through these stages where it's like, the shin bones getting connected to the knee bone or whatever.
Yeah.
So when Jeremiah prophesies in verse 7, he hears a great noise and a great quaking. And then something that God didn't actually say when God said what was about to happen in the earlier prophecy was the bones came together, bone by bone. And so we had not expected, or at least we had not been told that there was going to be a quaking. And we had not been told that the bones were going to come together, although I guess logically they would have to. Yeah. But do you do anything with those details?
One thing, this is not really an intellectual thing, but something that is throughout the book of Ezekiel is just like his attention to his own sensory experience in his body, and so having the addition of like there's a sound of rattling in here. Like sort of drops me back into my body like, oh, Ezekiel's really having an experience.
Yeah.
And of course this is the thing that would have to happen. Like the bones have to be next to each other to get stitched together. Like you're not just going to stitch together a random pile of bones. I guess you could. I don't know. Do you make more of that or make something different of that part?
I love that this is like, it's just adding to the sensory experience of the text. And like, that's like, when you say it that way, like I can hear the sound. Like I know what that sounds like, probably because I watched too many like Halloween cartoons or something along the way.
Spooky, scary skeletons.
I've never been clear whether the quaking is like just another way of describing the sound of the bones coming together.
Yeah.
Or whether there's some kind of earthquake that's happening, like the physical world is responding, the natural world in some kind of a way.
Yes.
But what I really love in the image is the coming together of the bones. And when you read this the way you do, which I think is the right way to read it, as this is just a pile of bones in a ditch. Not a ditch, but a large valley full of bones, like a mass grave. And they're not just lying there sort of connected to all the other bones. Like they've got to get back to the place where they belong. And so I like that. Like the initial act before things start to come together is a movement of the bones toward one another in some kind of a way. I just think that like it's kind of cool. And then I just think like theologically, like there's a lot that one can do there about the importance of being close and like moving toward one another. And like there's some things there that I think when you move out of the realm of metaphor a little bit to think about what might this mean for our own dry bones and such. I think there's some places we can maybe take that.
No, I think you're right. And I also really appreciate that you pushed me back into the Hebrew, because my translation there was a sound of rattling and the bones came together. So that makes it sound clearly like it's a bone sound, but it's just ra'ash, like it's just a loud sound.
Yeah.
So I think it absolutely could just be, again, this sound that seems to accompany Ezekiel on so many of these visions, that, the beating of the angel's wings, or like it's just like this sort of roaring sound. I think either of those are really interesting possibilities.
And it's a dramatic moment. Like it really is like something is like suddenly happening that's big and powerful and noisy. Yeah. It's a real thing. So when the bones come together and we get them stitched together, and then we get flesh on them, and then we get skin on them. So now we just have a bunch of dead bodies, which is like, I mean, it's improvement, but it's not what we were hoping for.
Right. I mean, it's improvement, but so what? So now it's a dead body. It's like you've sort of turned back the clock, but.
Right.
Yeah.
So now there's a second stage of the prophecy where Ezekiel is asked to prophesy to the CEB has to the breath. One thing that we should probably say is that the word ruach, which is getting used a lot in this text, in Hebrew, as you well know, can mean breath, but it can also mean wind.
Yes.
And it can also mean spirit.
Yes.
And so it's not always clear just in the use of the word which one of those we're talking about. Here we get a reference to the four winds bringing the breath. So in this case, Ezekiel is asked to, in the CEB, say to the breath, come from the four winds, breath. Breathe into these bodies and let them live. So how, in your own vision of what is happening here, how are breath and wind, and maybe spirit or maybe not, how are those related in this text?
What I'm finding when I read, again, my translation, which also has prophecy to the breath and breathe into these slain, it's making me picture like Adam being, God breathing into Adam's nostrils in Genesis, what is that, 2?
Yes.
But this feels really different to me. This does not have that kind of intimacy. This is happening on a bigger scale. We are calling to the four winds. It reminds me more like the Ruach Elohim in Genesis chapter 1 that is sort of, over creation, but it doesn't have that kind of intimate, CPR kind of moment.
I like that connection a lot, Amy, because it does. Like now we have formed an inanimate object that needs breath. Like we're in Genesis 2 right now.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And then what we expect next is the breath to come from God, but it doesn't. God commands the breath to come from the four winds.
Yeah.
And so I love that sort of clear gesture to that previous text, but the difference is really important.
Yeah.
And I don't know, when you read four winds, you can read this as the natural world responding, so that the the wind comes from the northeast, south, and west, and it just like fills up the lungs of these newly recreated bodies, and they start to breathe. You could read it as like, because it's the four winds, I guess you could read it as like it's gathering breath from all over the world. You could read wind and spirit together as like re-inspirit these bodies with the spirit of the four corners of the earth. There's just there's a number of directions you can go from here, all of which are kind of interesting to me, none of which has fully grabbed my commitment.
Yeah. No, I feel that, and I think I'm a little bit hung up on Genesis too, because I keep thinking like, but what about their like neshama? Like there's no soul. They're not ensouled. But I think, I think I'm getting too hung up on differences in language.
It's so interesting to me because like as a biblical Hebrew person who that like my knowledge pretty much ends with biblical Hebrew, is the nishma is just a word for breath to me, and ruach is actually the one that sounds like spirit to me. But I know in your later tradition, that
I
it gets
appreciate
reversed.
that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that correction. Thank you.
Oh, I don't know if it's a correction. It's
it's
a limitation of my Hebrew.
It is a redirection back to the period of Hebrew that we are in.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah. I kind of like the idea that it's. So if you read it as the four winds, I kind of like the idea that the earth itself, the natural world itself, is like giving life back to this community. I don't know exactly where that plane lands, but I just think it's such an interesting image.
It is a really interesting image to think about sort of the natural world, the whole extent of it sort of conspiring in a helpful way.
Yeah. So the last thing that happens in this little section is, so the breath comes into them, they stood up on their feet. So now you've got a group of people, living beings, standing together. And the CEB has an extraordinarily large company.
Me'od. Very.
Like big.
Yeah.
It's big, very.
Very.
The word that's used there is chayil, which can be the word for army. Robert Alter translates this as legion because legion to him captures both the like bigness of the multitude, but also it has a military connotation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, is the military connotation important to you? Is this just trying to say there's a bunch of people? Or is it trying to say there's some kind of military body? What do you think?
I feel like it depends what happens next. Like it depends what it is they're going to
What do they do
before I decide how I want to nuance that word.
So if we read the last section, that question will make more sense.
I think so.
Okay, let's do it then.
Okay.
I'll pick up in verse 11. He said to me, "Human one, these bones are the entire house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope has perished. We are completely finished. So now prophesy and say to them, the Lord God proclaims, I'm opening your graves. I will raise you up from your graves, my people, and I will bring you to Israel's fertile land. You will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and raise you up from your graves, my people. I will put my breath in you and you will live. I will plant you on your fertile land and you will know that I am the Lord. I've spoken and I will do it. This is what the Lord says." So here we get this image of the people of Israel who have been saying, the ones in exile, I'm assuming, our bones are dried up. And so this seems to be now an image that has been built on things that you actually could hear people in exile saying, our bones have withered, our bones are dry. And so this vision of the dry bones valley has in some ways been connected to that, in the same way that these dry bones can live. So then can you.
What would that mean to you if someone said my bones are dry?
I just feel like it means like the life has gone out of me. Like I feel brittle and lifeless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that idea? It's the whole thing is my bones are dried up. Our bones have dried up and our hope has perished. We are completely finished.
I think this, some of this conversation will probably push to the end, but I think I read this whole thing as not about an individual person, but as about the community of Israel.
Yeah.
And so saying our bones have dried up, I don't know what that means to an individual person, but to say we have no way to stay connected to each other anymore. We have no living tissue, we have no parameters, we have no skin, we have nothing that's gonna
interesting. Yeah.
hold us together anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the layers over the skin that would sort of nurture it and protect it are gone.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So the individual people within the community have been separated, disconnected from one another, and so they are not able to live. Is that what you're after? Because the
connective
tissue is gone.
Because the connective tissue.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So it turns out that this is the entire house of Israel, and so in some sense, all the bones that are in the valley have been representing exactly the entire house of Israel. And so maybe it is both, in my mind, it's both the individual people that are part of the community of Israel and also the community as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Does this help you then in thinking about that question about Chayil in the previous verse?
It is really interesting to go back to the vision of Chayil, of the huge multitude of people, to press back a little bit against my idea of we're really just talking about a communal body. Yes, they are next to each other, but it makes a big deal of, there are a lot of them, a lot of individual people. I don't know. It doesn't feel, unless you want to say the Lord of hosts, the angels that surround God, that kind of host. I don't know. I don't feel another military vibe. Do you?
It doesn't feel militaristic to me either. The only way that it feels militaristic to me at all is about that use of the word harugim, that they are the slain ones.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But that doesn't necessarily mean, they could have been killed by an army, and now here they are constituted as a large multitude. And maybe the sort of the military sense there is you are no longer vulnerable in the way that you were vulnerable, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what the people are going to do is go back to the land and be fruitful. There's nothing military in what they are reconstituted to do. They're reconstituted to go back and live their life.
Right. I mean, they are a large multitude with a common leader and a common purpose. So, in that way, they are similar to an army, I guess. But
yeah. Amy, the language here shifts. So before we had a valley full of bones strewn around.
Yeah.
Here the language of grave appears many, many times.
Yeah.
I am opening your graves. I will raise you up from your graves. And so this is obviously a related image of dead people coming back to life, but it's not the same image.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious what you make of that shift.
Yeah, that this is really the $100,000 moment here where we transition from the one image to this now explicitly graves, and many of them. This is not a common grave where bones are scattered around. I think that what I take from the transition is the metaphor that it feels like death. It feels like everything that was life-giving to you and that gave your life purpose and meaning and the way in which the world made sense is gone. And so, even if you're walking around in your body, it feels like you have died. And so, I'll say just up front, there for sure is a Jewish stream of thought that understands this as literal resurrection of your body. Yes.
Yeah, Christian too.
Yeah. I I see it more in the context of the story as this is not the end for you, and for you as the people of Israel, because it seems it seems the story should end here. Like logically, the story should end when the temple is destroyed and all the people are exiled, but it doesn't. And so I see this as a hope that there is something else yet ahead, that life force is still there and will come back for you.
I really love that, Amy. I appreciate that so much, because there's also a Christian reading of this. I mean, a fairly common one, that this is like the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm totally with you that in the context of Ezekiel, that's not what is happening here. Like, these people are being reconstituted to go back and live in the land and recreate the community back in the land. And so I think it is one of the sources of what comes to be the doctrine of bodily resurrection later on.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not, I think, to me, it's just not what Ezekiel is thinking about. Is exactly thinking about what you are thinking about. Is you feel dead. You feel like dry bones. You feel like it's over, and that there is no hope for the future. And yet here comes this ridiculous prophecy that everything is gonna be restored, and you trust that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is about the restoration of community from a seemingly death-like experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The shift to the graves helps me. Just like, I cannot imagine myself, like, what it would be like to be a bone in a pile of bones in a valley.
Mm-hmm.
But I can sure imagine what it feels like to be in the grave. And like the sort of, that connects with me in a more personal way.
Mm.
And so, to think about like, oh, like that, yeah, to be able to come back from there, like the terminal point, even if it has gotten that far, and it's not that far yet, that there is yet still hope. It's a more relatable version of these bones are all dried out to me.
Yeah.
Like, this person is already in their grave.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that like I've been pushing on the communal point, which is important to me, but I appreciate that here it gets individual. Like, these are separate, people are in their separate graves. And I think you're right. It does invite that kind of personal.
And they are called out of their graves to reconstitute the community.
Mm.
Right. So I think like, yeah, you and I are sort of poking at different parts of the big picture here, but they're both there. Like,
yeah,
the community requires individual people, and the individual people must come together into the community. And so the restoration involves both of those things together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Amy, this last verse, I will plant you and you will know that I am the Lord. I was just thinking, like, for whatever reason, when I read that, it was taking my head back to the last time we saw that, or at least the last time I remember that we saw that, which was in the manna story back in Exodus 16. And it was, when you see the manna on the ground, you will know that I am the Lord.
Mm.
I don't know if there's anything to say about that other than to notice it. Any connections you make about that?
What I noticed similarly, both in that verse and the beginning of verse 13 before, was we spoke earlier about that part where God asks Ezekiel, can these bones live? And Ezekiel says, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
And then this sort of pericope that the narrative lectionary put together for us is like, and you need to know. Now you know.
I love that.
And I do think that's part of the business of God's miracles. Like, some of it is to care for our actual bodies and to care for our communities. And some of it is to, strengthen our trust in God so that we think these things are possible. So we don't close the door to faith when they really seem pretty impossible.
Yeah. I like that a lot, Amy, because in that manna story, as I recall, we were talking about being able to see miracles in the everyday, which I think is important.
Mm-hmm. It's really important.
But then sometimes you also need to be able to see miracles that seem like they are against all probability. Yeah. And here, the restoration of the people of Israel out of the exile is one of those.
Yeah.
And so God is capable of doing these dramatic things that you would never think could happen, and then here it is. And that you're gesturing us back to Genesis 2, and that creation story is also in that realm of the God who created at the beginning is also possible for that God to recreate here and now, and you will know that God is God. All of that's kind of tied up here together.
Yeah.
All right, Amy. So when we are thinking about how we read this text in and with and for our communities today, what are you focusing on from this text?
Bobby, I think this conversation has me really thinking about Ezekiel's own transformation through the process of this. Like I asked you at the beginning, like if they're alone in a valley of bones, why is God making Ezekiel do this? And in a way we get sort of an answer here. It's like, okay, now you're gonna have to go out and speak to the people. Like when you're just speaking to the bones, maybe you like sort of kind of believe it could happen, but are like maybe you don't have to be as, the bones are an easier audience in some way than the people who are going to tell you over and over again that this is, they don't believe you. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And this story has me thinking of an image that I learned through my teachers, but I think it comes from Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, of what it is, what faith is in his imagination. And it's a nice concrete image. So I've never done this activity, but if you had to climb over a wall, like a brick wall, and there's no like footing, there's like, imagine that you had a hook you could throw over the wall so it could anchor on something, and then you could kind of pull yourself up through with the hook. So you throw it over the wall and it catches on something, and so you have the opportunity to start going, and then you realize like, I don't know what this hooked on. Like as soon as I put my weight on it, it might fall. Yeah. And sort of like every step that you take, you don't know if it's going to support the next one. And so what in his description, what faith is, what trust is like once it catches, you do the next thing and then do the next, like you're never going to know for sure what it is that's hooked on the other side. You just know that the door is open enough for you to do the next thing. And watching Ezekiel over the course of this go from, the door being just open a little bit to like, I don't know, maybe you can do, I'm just not going to really answer your question, to being involved in this miracle and being willing to be involved in it. And then being sent out to speak to the people. And that, I don't know, I just am thinking a lot about the way that sort of trust or faith can be contagious in that way. And that any person who is willing to keep it open and do the next thing might have the capacity to bring that word to a bigger group of people. And I think especially when things are really difficult and dark. So certainly can think about the season of Advent, certainly can think about our time now. Certainly can think about Ezekiel's time. We have to fight for those. Yeah. And take every little step that we can. And that's what I'm seeing in this text today.
I really love that, Amy. The ridiculousness of prophesying to dry bones, that it could be, it's going to be okay, y'all. Like it seems ridiculous. And yet Ezekiel does it. And this is also then the call for us in some way to prophesy hope in a world that seems like it is beyond hope. I love that.
What are you thinking, Bobby?
To me, like I'm trying to think about Advent, you know, and you connected there at the end. And to me, this is such a great Advent text. Like once you kind of spend a little time with it, because that image of like dryness or we're in the grave, like this is exactly the idea of Advent, that we are in a time of darkness where we can't see. There's like a little tiny light off in the distance that is the barest glimmer of hope. It's like that door just barely cracked open for Ezekiel. And having the trust in that barest glimmer of hope that actually is something that you can hook onto and speak truth even though it seems impossible. Like the connections to Advent there are just really, really rich to me.
Mm.
One of the things that I've been thinking of, it's kind of funny to me because oftentimes you're the one who reads things sort of personally and I'm the one who reads them communally. And today we're a little switched around, which I like. Yeah. Is like this text, I mean, it speaks to people who are going through a hard time, and it speaks to communities that are struggling, and it speaks to a world that is hopeless. Like it speaks on all of these levels. And I can hear this as, Bobby, this grave that you feel yourself in, or the brittleness of your bones, like that's not the end of this story, or for my community, or for my country, or for my world. One little detail, like I don't know why this is what catches my attention, but it's in the dry bones coming together. The two pieces that I kind of have latched onto. The first is that the bones have to move toward each other in order to be restitched.
Yes.
And we feel, at least I feel, very isolated and not sure who my bones are that I can connect to. And like, there is a real like sense of like self-protection for me right now. And so this idea that in order for God to do anything with us, we have to be near the body. And I think there's something really rich there, thinking about where we position ourselves and how we get close to one another. The other thing that I love in that reanimation scene is that the community doesn't have its own breath. It cannot find within itself the ability to live. It can't auto-resuscitate, I guess. And so what it needs is breath or wind, but God is not going to supply that directly like in Genesis 2, but it comes from other parts of the world. The wind responds and says, we've got some extra breath for you. And that idea that in order for us to become again, we need to be open to the receiving of breath that comes from east and west and north and south, and welcoming of the inspiriting that is possible from other brothers and sisters and siblings, other communities, other even natural world that can reanimate us. Sometimes we just don't have it in ourselves, but it's out there. We just have to be open to receiving it.
Oh, I love that.
All right, Amy. Well, next week we are going to continue into the third Sunday of Advent in Isaiah 55. All you who are thirsty, come to the waters. Really lovely text. It's also going to be our last week in the Hebrew scriptures for this year, and so we will relish it with a particular relishment as we prepare to move on to the Gospel of John.
Yes, all the relishing. Yeah.
Amy,
Wow.
I have loved reading this text with you, and I appreciate so much the way you open up texts and theologies for me. I'm grateful.
This was a lot of fun. So much better together than apart.
Always, always. All right, friend. Well, I will see you next time.
I'll see you next time. Be well.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us next week as we read Isaiah 55, 1-13 for the third Sunday of Advent. Until then, keep on digging.